Welcome one and all, here to a fairy tale outside the world's reach, abandoned by the planet's blessing and set to cast adrift. It is an island crafted out of stories right out of a picture book. Please lend your ears to these many fables born here, before the road that led you here withers away once and for all. You are not asked to forgive anything, nor should you do so. Just bear witness to Britain's roots, as feeble and ancient as they may be. This fable follows a girl born in paradise, inheriting a single duty, to fulfill one that her predecessor abandoned. That duty included a scenery, one she would see and hear whether awake or asleep. A storm that never calmed. The only thing that laid at the end was a star that would never lose its shine. Drifting into the British Isles, a prophecy would come to her. One she had no will in choosing. One that predicted the future. A future where she would defeat the ruthless queen who ruled Britain. This fairy's name is Artoria, the second fairy from Avalon. Artoria, raised in Tintagel, had experienced love and affection from the villagers. Raised quietly and trained for when she would turn 16, Artoria was adored by all and held the villagers' hopes for the day she set out to defeat the queen. Or so appearance dictates. The reality of the situation could not be farther from the truth. The villagers had not known of the girl's fairy eyes. The truth of everything was clear to that small girl from the start. She had no choice in whether to see it or not. Fairies who never believed in her from the start, who only saw her as a way to prosper and stay alive, as even her friend would not differ. Raised in a stable, Artoria was not a saviour to the village, but a slave, one who could not laugh with a staff in hand. At one point she was able to leave for a short time. Ending up in Gloucester, she would meet a queen from another clan, that queen being Knocknaria. As she listens to the queen, she realises the dreams and purposes of the fairies, complete opposites of each other, an objective meant to be fulfilled that was their purpose, yet that purpose would never bring them happiness. It was the same for Artoria, who had only wanted to live as an ordinary girl, one who was never burdened with the prophecy or duty she was forced to bear, along with the storm that would always rage on. Artoria continued living her life as a slave, always accepting what others had desired from her, because to her, it's easier to just accept it and do what they want. If you don't, then you'll be killed, and refusing is just a waste of time. However, even she could not stay true to those feelings when faced with having to take the life of a fairy who she had grown to be friends with. A blacksmith who never wanted to be with other fairies, yet was able to be friends with Artoria. She fakes the murder, the truth is exposed. As tensions rise, fairies start to kill each other mercilessly, the village burning away. The only thing that girl could do was watch her home become hell. Granted the chance to run away, with the help of the blacksmith who gave up his life to save her, she left with the staff in hand. Guilt filled her from the event. She was a saviour who failed to save a single person that day, as the only thing she can do is dream and apologise. But that girl's specialty is always being able to get back on her feet, even if she is on the brink of collapse, and that is how her pilgrimage starts. For Artoria, this pilgrimage had turned out to produce nothing of value, destined to ring 6 bells, yet all remaining unrung. All of it overwhelms her as she runs into the nameless forest, thinking that this role, one that was always attached to her wherever she wandered, could be erased for a time where she could be herself. This led to her meeting Chaldea, people from outside, none who knew of the prophecy, different from others. For the first time, Artoria was allowed to be herself. She was allowed to have friends, and even if the time in the village would be short-lived, she had been shown gratitude by one fairy, something no one had ever shown to her before. The genuine heart of someone else, no hidden intentions or lies, just someone who thanked her. That meaning gave her something she would always hold to her heart and be protected by until the very end of her life. The tale then continued onwards, the prophecy that was being fulfilled, as she was joined by her friends. This was the first time Artoria got to experience something new in her life. She could finally walk with someone she loved. She could finally smile happily. Yet even as she could do that, Artoria would always hide behind that same bright smile, as she did not want to ruin the environment that was around her. Learning about proper human history along the pilgrimage, she rang the bells, and for ringing them, she got to know the other her, the Artoria in another history who gave up her life, the chance to be an ordinary girl, for Britain. Even as she knew how it would end, this Artoria questions the decision, not understanding why someone would give up their ordinary life for an outcome that would never end happily, just because one has the strength to do so. For such a reason, Artoria is only able to see it as a waste of a life, but in truth, she knows the reason, for it is the very thing she has always stared at and saw since the very start. The feisty and pure girl rang all the bells, signifying who she would have to fight soon, the queen that the prophecy had always destined her to fight, the ruthless queen who shared in her struggle, for she was her predecessor, a fairy from paradise. Artoria knew in truth that she could never stand up to the queen. The queen was the strongest in the land. She had gone on multiple pilgrimages, and even as she saw her fade away in a false victory, she continued to hold on to that respect she had always showed for her. As to Artoria, to be able to throw away your own duty, even when the world has told you otherwise, to take what you really want and be who you are without caring for others' opinions or the world, to be able to overcome the storm that had tormented her all of those years. To her, that was admirable. She always looked up to her, and even if her destiny was to fight the queen, Artoria felt melancholic about it. The queen had suffered the same life Artoria did. Killed by the fairies, the queen died in her castle, with no one to protect or save her. It should have been over, the prophecy fulfilled with the new queen, Nocnaria, going to the throne. This was meant to be a special occasion of happiness and hope. With the Queen of Winter deceased, there were no more threats, but this was far from the truth. Giving up that chance, the fairies poisoned the new queen, and with that, the sins the fairies had committed, the old roots that this land was born from, it had now beckoned for the promised destruction, from the calamities that were born of Britain's sins. This marked the beginning of the end to this destined fairy tale. Even nearing the end, there was a chance to grant salvation upon the fairies and the land, the duty that remained incomplete. Artoria now stood as the single person who could atone for the fairies, a duty she never wished to fulfill, one she tried to run away from, but never escaping it, a burden she always had to handle by herself, and even as she speaks out about her feelings, the hatred she felt for everyone, and the mission she had, Artoria was reminded of everyone in the land who had suffered, and to this fairy, it was a chance to grant salvation, to fulfill the duty she was born with, to bring salvation upon the fairies and rid them of the gaping hole that laid in their heart. However, this burden was hers to share. The friends she had met on this long journey had now given Artoria extra time. It had a consequence, of course. It came at the expense of someone else's life. The man that bore the body of someone that would save her in another time as well was all too happy to give up his life for the fairy he oversaw on the long journey, and give her the chance to understand why she went as far as she did. And as he fades away, the holy sword Excalibur is formed as Artoria becomes its protector. And so, everything led the stargazers to face Britain's destruction, something that promised no survivors. By the end, one remained, feared by even the Queen, who put all of her effort into finding a way to defeat him. Artoria must face down that very being, the one the fairies wronged, the one whose sins had been righteous and were fair, for he was a deity who reached out in good faith and was rewarded with deception. But Artoria knows what she must do. The awe and inspiration she feels towards the Queen becomes clear as she takes up from the masterpiece of Tonelico the Saviour. Hi, just a heads up from editor me here. Most of you will probably know Tonelico as Esk. I referred to her as Tonelico since that's what she is known as in the fan translation, which I used. So just to clear up any confusion, Tonelico is the same individual as Esk. She's just called Tonelico in the Reisha fan translation. Anyway, back to the video. She fires a strike strong enough to blast even Camelot to dust, only to find that the deity stands without change, only a small amount of skin being peeled off. Artoria's body was on the verge of collapse. She had failed to use Rongomeniat to its fullest, but even she knew that there was a way to win. At the cost of her own life, she could fire a strike using her own body as the ammunition, even if it meant she could never return to her friends. She accepted that, and at the very end of her life, she began to recall the dazzling scenery of the twilight Britain she had lived in, the people she had met on this pilgrimage coming back to her, moments of that same journey, and at the end of it all, she had not felt a single feeling of regret for that journey. Artoria had now become the saviour of Britain, fulfilling what should have been done 2,000 years ago. She fires a strike, using every piece of her remaining, the strike that shined brightly, breaking through all of its skin, and thus gave way to the end of the calamity that laid in the bottom of the pit, even at the cost of her own life. However, this is not the end of the tale, nor Artoria's story. The land itself had been determined from the start to be destroyed. The atonement that had been granted was far too late now. The land was destined to fall from the very start, by the bite of a meager insect. There is no longer any possibility of winning. Everyone had faded away. Whatever fairies remained would be devoured by the void that was shaped into a dragon. The curtains on this fable will certainly close in a tragedy. There is no longer any hope left in this land. Yet even in the endless void, a lone star shines. The familiar star that had always been shining in the young fairy's mind. The storm was at its strongest, the negative emotions that the storm embodied to the girl. Her duty was fulfilled, but the storm ceased to calm. She could hear the tolling of the bells. Alongside that came with the voices of the fairies. She had condemned the land now to fading away, and as she did, the fairies faulted her. Thousands of voices pile on. This was her reward for giving salvation. This is all that she would receive for carrying out her duty. Artoria questions the meaning of it all. Struggling in the storm that made her life a hell, she feels a warm embrace come from within the storm. One person protects her. One person reaches out to her. The fairy who died at the start, after being shown kindness for the first time. This fairy felt gratitude for Artoria's actions. That gratitude allowed her to protect and embrace Artoria. And the fairy's name? It was Hope. And so, as Artoria came to her own answer and resolve, the storm disappears. She moves towards the star, that eternal shining light now being reached, and as she approaches the end of it all, she knows that even if others may see it as a small reason, it is what gave her the strength to push forward, and now she becomes that very star, a shining beacon that shall guide and give hope to the world, no matter the time. And so, the story shall have a different ending, a bittersweet ending, where hope prevails. But that girl we see now, she is not the same as the one who went on her pilgrimage. That girl faded away at the scene of the calamity. But this new person, Artoria Avalon, contained all the dreams and memories of the Fairy of Paradise, and shall always hold them close to her. The land may be gone, but there is hope for the future, and as such, the sword shall always be in the hands of those who will protect the earth. Fighting the very being who brought destruction, she accepts him for who he is, for he was forced to his role, and understands that just like her, he had a duty to fulfill. And with that duty accomplished, he fell and lost. This is the end of a fable that came from a fairy tale crafted by a lone queen. Now you, the audience who watch this unfold, may ask, just what was all of it for? For what reason would someone go that far? And to answer that question, it is for the meaning of the star that one must look into. That meaning is hope. The small hopes and dreams of every fairy, happy and good ones, that wished for a brighter future. Artoria was a girl who wished for an ordinary life. A simple hairpin was something she desperately wanted, but never obtained. But she upheld her duty because of that simple star. For a reason others may see as pointless, she did not care for that. She did it for that reason, and as a result was a saviour, the most pure and wonderful one, who gave the fairies salvation and saved the world. And thus concludes the tale, and the story of the village girl, burdened with the fate of a lost world. Thank you very much to Mimi for writing me this wonderful script about Artoria Casta. I hope you guys have enjoyed LB6. It's definitely what I'd call the peak of FGO, and I will be making more videos on it. But now until the next manifestation, where hope and despair gather once more.